genuinely probably one of the most important things I've learned in my life to date. But the ironic thing is, if I tell you now to not think of a polar bear, you are all going to be thinking of a polar bear. What I'm about to say is the most important thing that I have learnt in my life for looking after yourself, for being happy, for being fulfilled, for dealing with your mental health. Hello everybody, and you are listening to the Rob Talks podcast, and this is episode 6. Now, what is episode 6 going to be all about today? Today, episode 6 is going to be based on 3 topics. Firstly, around overthinking. The second topic is around genuinely probably one of the most important things I've learned in my life to date, around how control and expectation affects us in multiple ways throughout our lives. And the last theme for today is all about how to be extraordinary. And I think this is something that is achievable for everybody, but I will touch upon it within the last topic. So the first topic that I wanted to speak about on today's episode is all about overthinking. Now, this is partially because I am someone who has suffered a lot from overthinking over the years, especially when I was in my first year of university only 2 years ago. And even within the past week, I suffered with quite a bit of overthinking situations and even catastrophizing, as I spoke about in the previous episode. And so I wanted to speak about what overthinking has been for me and how I kind of deal with it in a way. So overthinking overall is essentially of where we start to become anxious about something that we're thinking about. We take one little thought and then it starts to perpetuate into this domino effect of questions, of anxiousness, and this horrid feeling because we're over-analysing something. It can be as simple as, well, the most common thing is thinking about something that's going to happen in the future and wondering, what if this could happen? What if that could happen? For me, as I've said in previous podcast episodes, it was about catching the train for me in my first year of university. It was all to do with this idea of what was going to happen if the train didn't turn up. What happens if the train's late and I've got to catch another train? All of these situations that were out of my control, and I was forever thinking about the anxiety that I would feel from them, and the kind of lack of control then meaning that I would have no way of fixing them, no solutions for them. But one thing that I have realised, even within the past week, more specifically, is that overthinking doesn't have to just apply to future events and the anxiety around of what if and what could happen. Overthinking can also be about stuff that is happening in the present, stuff that is happening right now. So you can be having a thought about that, for example, for me, of that you were meant to drink your protein shake, and then you start to overthink about it of, but if I have this protein shake, is it going to do what I want it to do? And you start to overanalyze and you start to have too many thoughts about it. And a lot of the time, your brain will naturally lean more towards the negative thoughts and the negativity around something. Now, thinking about a protein shake is probably a bad example, but it's what I can think of at the moment. And honestly, when I was thinking about drinking my protein shake this week, it was all because I've started to find personally with myself, as I've been going more and more to the gym and I'm having these protein shakes, that in fact they sometimes even make me feel anxious. And I don't know why. It's something that I've not added up. I'm not someone who is a food scientist, food chemist, whatever it may be, who understands why that is, or whether it's just a perpetuating thought that is happening in my head. But consequently, I've started to overthink about drinking my protein shake. And it made me realise that this is something that can happen to all of us. We can all overthink about things that are happening right now in life, as in literally within this 1 second. You could be overthinking about why you're listening to me right now on this podcast. You could be overthinking about something that is happening right now at work or at university and you're studying or whatever it may be. And it can be highly frustrating. And a lot of the time with overthinking, it brings a lot of these anxious-filled thoughts and these negative thoughts that we really can't get rid of. And I know how it feels, because you're sat in bed or sat in this chair as I am now, and you're thinking about this thought and it's going round and round your head, and the first thing that we normally turn to as humans is to go, right, if I tell myself to stop thinking about that thought, then I'll stop thinking about it. But the ironic thing is, if I tell you now to not think of a polar bear, you are all going to be thinking of a polar bear, be it white, blue, whatever. You will be thinking of a polar bear, because I've spoken about it multiple times and I've told you not to think about it. And so it can be very tricky then for your brain to then go, don't think about a polar bear. Oh no, we just thought of a polar bear. And then that happens. And so this is what can happen with our anxious thoughts and when we are overthinking. We have thoughts that we just can't get rid of. And so what I wanted to speak about is kind of the research that I've actually done further into this, because I didn't understand this much myself, and how we can, in a way, fix it and try our best to deal with these thoughts that we have and deal with overthinking. So I've spoken about before that if your overthinking is about something that is in the future, the easiest thing to do with that is to ask the question of, what if? Because ultimately, let's be realistic about this. With a lot of things that we do in life, as humans naturally, traveling in a car, traveling on a train, I don't know, even doing some form of exercise, whatever it may be, there is always the tiniest probability that we could pose the what if question, and that there's the tiniest probability that you could die. Now, it's not worth thinking about, because that probability is so small with the majority of things that happen in our lives that it's not even worth thinking about. And so a lot of the time with the what if question and dealing with things in the future, it means by asking the question of what if this happens, it then helps you to work out what you can control and what solutions you can put in place. So, for example, with the whole protein shake thing that is happening in my thoughts at the moment, which is more of a present thing but can be applied to this, is this idea of then thinking, so what if the protein shake does make me feel anxious? Then the thing that I can control is I can try a different protein shake, or I can try a different way of getting protein into my diet. There are so many solutions that when you eventually sit back and pose the what if questions, that you realize you have actually got some form of control over your thoughts. You've got solutions. And there's always a way to deal with overthinking about the future and overthinking in this way. And another thing that I've only really learned about this week are two things. Is firstly, with these thoughts, the key is actually, as I spoke about in how these thoughts can be really reoccurring, and when we try and tell ourselves to not think of them, we in fact think of them. The first thing to do is to accept the thoughts. Now, that may sound really annoying, but it's been proven that if you accept the thought that you are having, that negative, horrible thought, and you accept the feelings that come with it, you are much more likely to feel better in the long run. And this could be even put to an extreme example. So say that you are thinking about something that's quite like a nightmare, like you're having this thought around that if you open the door every day that a bear is going to kill you, just as something very extreme and random that's just come into my head. Hopefully I won't have a nightmare about that tonight. But essentially, if you were to think about that thought that is coming around in your head, and rather than telling yourself to not think about it and accept that you are having that thought repeatedly, eventually that thought loses the power that it has over you, because you've become used to it. And this is what we can do with our negative thoughts. This is what we can do with thoughts that make us anxious. If you accept them, over time, they lose their anxiety or anxious feeling that you have towards them. It's honestly something that I'd never even thought of before, but in doing research, I realise now how we can use that power of just accepting the thought that can help us to move on. And my second point with this is around analysing why you're thinking about that thought. I always love saying this in terms of that there's loads of things in life of where you can just take a pause and decide to step outside the box. I always say that because people always think about outside the box thinking, blue sky thinking. So my idea of it all is that if you are in this bubble or in this box of where something is happening, it's great to then just take a step outside the box and then pose the questions and analyse, why am I thinking about this? Why is this thought in my head? Because naturally there's always going to be answers. You may not be able to find them at that time, and it may be easier in fact to even talk to somebody about it to help you define why you're having those thoughts. That's where your friends can come in, and if needs be, that's where a counsellor can come in to help you to realise why you're having these thoughts. One of the reasonings of why I was having certain thoughts this week that I realised was in fact because of the stuff, as in the documentaries and TV programmes that I was watching this week. And I didn't realise until I stepped outside the box and thought about it, that those TV programmes and the opinions and the facts that were in them were actually affecting my thoughts. And so sometimes we have to just be able to take a step outside of the box and just analyse, why am I thinking that? Why am I having these negative thoughts? And this really ties in nicely to my second topic for this podcast episode, which is all around how control and expectation affects us in multiple ways. I very much had an epiphany this week, I would call it, a kind of mini eureka moment. Because throughout my life, even though it is a currently short life, I have always been thinking about what are things that we can tie together that can ultimately give a message to help people. And I genuinely think what I am about to say is the most important thing that I have learnt in my life for looking after yourself, for being happy, for being fulfilled, for dealing with your mental health. And so much of it comes down to this one quote that I live by, and I've told people multiple times about this, and I remember chatting to my flatmates about this last year, and I always have it on my whiteboard. The quote goes something like this: God, grant me the strength to change the things I can. Grant me the knowledge to understand the things I cannot change, and the wisdom to tell the difference. And the key with this is all to do with control, and the control that we have over life's events, be them in the past, the present, or the future. Because once we understand the control that we have over situations, it massively changes how we feel about that situation. I was in fact listening to a podcast recently with a fantastic journalist and book writer and researcher called Johann Ahari, who within his book, which is the book called Lost Connections, he spoke about how that it was proven that if we have control over the work we do, as in when you are at work or doing your job, if you have more control over what you do, the happier and more fulfilled you are. So if you're working within a big corporate where your life is dictated by your boss and you have no input, then you are much more likely to be unhappy or just to get on with life and not feel fulfilled. From Johann Ahari's research, it proves the fact of that we need to have some form of control within our work life. And I believe that this comes into everything that's within our lives, because it comes into our work and our passions, but also our control over our mental health, the way we perceive the world. So many things come down to just this one focus on control. and the control that we have, but also the things that we cannot control. And there is also something linked to this that I've been thinking about recently, that Mo Gawdat, fantastic writer about happiness and previous chief executive of Google X, speaks about in terms of how expectation affects us. And this works in terms of that if you have a situation such as rain. Now, this is a very basic situation, but a lot of the time people always think that there's always something emotional attached to rain, when in fact the truth is it's just rain, right? It's just water droplets falling from the sky. It is neither negative and it is neither positive until you as the human add the thought or add the context to it. And so it can be negative rain because you've got to go and walk in it, but it could be happy rain because you're getting to dance in it. Whatever it may be, you are in control of how you perceive that. And that is what is linked to our expectation. Because if we expect that within our lives something is going to be negative, then consequently you are much more likely to have a negative perspective and not enjoy that moment or feeling, and consequently not be happy. This is why our expectation in life, and then linking to our perspective in life, dictates our happiness. And this all comes down to the fact that we have control over that. We have control over what expectations we have for life's events, for things that come up in our day-to-day lives. And so the key is to have that open mind, in a way a kind of form of growth mindset, an open-mindedness that allows for your expectation not to take over an event. Because if you already have a negative expectation, or even you have an expectation which fits a certain bracket, and then you go to the event or you go to the thing that is happening and it turns out that it is not as you expected, then you're going to be unhappy. You're going to be dissatisfied. And this happens so much within our lives. And it's something that we have control over. To put it in its simplest way as an example, if you have the expectation that you are going to your friend's wedding, and your expectation is that it's going to be really boring, it's going to be great to see your friend, but it's going to be really boring, and that you're not going to be able to chat to anybody because nobody is going to want to speak to you. But then you get to the wedding and it turns out that it's not boring and that in fact everyone is talking to you, then all of a sudden your expectation has been misaligned with the actual reality of what is happening. And this can go both ways. You could have had the expectation that the wedding was going to be amazing, and then you get there and it's terrible. And that can then dictate your happiness. And consequently, then the bit that you can have control over is your perspective. And once you control your perspective, that then ultimate end of this equation of whether you are happy or you are not happy. So to summarize with this second topic that I know it can be hard to get your head around, and I'm sure I will talk about certain bits more in depth in future podcast episodes. But I genuinely think the biggest thing that I've ever learned in my life around everything, like I mean literally everything, my work, my studies, my passion, my fulfillment for life, my happiness in life, looking after my mental health, my mental well-being, literally everything that makes me, Robert McKinnon, that makes my life amazing or terrible, all comes down to this focus on what I am in control of and what I am not in control of. And consequently, my expectations and my perspective on life. I really hope that you gain some value from that point, because it is genuinely the most important thing I think I've ever learned in my life. And I'm sure that I will do further videos and talk about it in podcasts to come. Maybe it's my TEDx talk, I don't know. We will see. And the last topic for today's episode 6 on the Rob Talks podcast is all to do with how to be extraordinary. So I'm going to tell you a story. When I was in my younger teens, I was relatively talented at archery. I used to go to these have a go sessions and used to do really well. And I remember that it was one of these sports that I just thought, you know what? I'm good at this. I should explore it further. And I remember speaking to the people there, and they said that there was a club at X place, and I really begged my mum to help myself and my brother join and to get involved, and eventually she said yes. And then we spent a long time buying very expensive archery equipment, but then we went to the club and hey presto, everything was going great. I was shooting against the other kids and doing really well. I was really proving that I had some form of talent for this, and I thought, you know what? I think I can take this somewhere. And so I remember then thinking that the next step was all about, can I shoot for Derbyshire? Because that's where I originally live. And can I shoot at a county level? And then from there, even thinking about the Olympics. I remember watching the Olympics and watching the South Koreans versus the Italians in the final, seeing how amazing they were at shooting at 70 meters, I believe it is off the top of my head, and being able to hit this little X that is in the center of the golden circle on the target. It was amazing, and I genuinely thought, and I could see myself being at the Olympics and representing Team GB. And from that, it just so happens that there was a poster that came up on the notice board that spoke about trials for the Junior GB Personal Development Program. And I said, you know what, let's do it. Let's do it. And so myself and my brother signed up, and we went along. We were very lucky, picked out of thousands of kids to be on this program, and it was amazing. We went to Lilleshall, where the national centre was for archery and badminton, and I think a few other sports as well, and it was fantastic. I was living the dream, and I genuinely thought that I was going to be getting ready to go to the Japan or even Paris Olympics. And then something hit me in terms of that all of a sudden I realised that my talent wasn't enough. Yes, I could go on the training days when they had them and perform really well and even do better than some of the other kids. But the main reason why the other kids progressed and I didn't was because of something else that I couldn't work out. And eventually, because of me not having this thing, me and my brother eventually were then kicked off the course because we weren't going to progress, because a lot of what we were basing upon was our talent, and we didn't, in my personal opinion at least, I didn't have passion for archery in the way that I originally did when I first started. And so I remember, and I was thinking about this recently, about what was that equation, what was the reasoning for why I didn't make it to the Olympics? What was the reasoning for why I didn't become this extraordinary athlete? And what I pinned it down to was the fact that it was perseverance and hard work for passion. And this was because when I spoke to some of the other kids, I realised that they had targets, which are called bosses in archery, in their garages. They would shoot thousands upon thousands of arrows every single week just to practice their technique. They would do hundreds of exercises to keep their strength up, to keep their core strength up, and particularly their back and arm strength, because as you get older, you need to be able to pull a certain poundage of bow to be able to reach the Olympic distance. And I realised from those moments that I just didn't have the passion for archery in the way that these kids did. But most importantly, I didn't have the commitment and perseverance to achieve that goal, because I really enjoyed archery And still to this day, if I ever get a chance to do archery, I really enjoy it. But I didn't realise that I didn't have the passion and didn't have the perseverance that I needed and the consistency that I needed to be able to become this extraordinary athlete. However, these lessons I now apply to my own life, and I hope that you can apply to yours, in the sense of that we have to understand that every extraordinary person, or at least the majority of them, all had to start at square one. Everyone was a baby at one point. Everyone was a kid. Everyone was a young adult working out the world and finding their passion, finding out what they're good at. And so there is always an opportunity for anybody, for the over 7 billion people on this planet, to be extraordinary. And ultimately, you define what extraordinary is. I suspect there are still some athletes who are at the top of their game who don't define themselves as extraordinary, but we would. And so the key thing is that if you have a passion, or you have something that makes you feel fulfilled in life, that makes you feel happy in life, then understand that you can achieve those big goals linked to that passion, or linked to that visualization you have of yourself. Anybody with perseverance, with hard work, with commitment, can become extraordinary or be extraordinary. We all can do it. We can all be extraordinary human beings in our own ways and in the ways that we define ourselves. It is possible. And I hate it when I hear that people don't have that self-belief, don't have, and even I've personally not had that self-belief before, in that you can achieve your dreams. You can achieve those crazy goals. It all comes down to you making a decision of what you're going to do. And for me in archery, that decision was I going to force my parents to spend a load of money to put a target in the garage and to commit to doing hundreds of exercises just so that I could go and shoot in the Olympics? Or was I going to focus on other things that were truly my proper passions and the things I even do now today? And in the end, I made the latter choice. And you know what the good thing is about it? I don't regret it. And I'm happy about it. I'm happy that I'm here right now where I am in life because of that decision. Because I decided to focus on what my true passion was in the end of design, and focusing upon empowering other people and helping other people to have better lives and helping to make the world a better place. I made that decision and I have no regrets behind it. And I hope that ultimately that is what is going to make me personally an extraordinary human being, committing to this cause that I have and this passion that I have and the fulfillment that I get within the work that I do and within the life that I lead. So to become extraordinary is possible for all of us. Don't doubt yourself. If you put the hard work in and you have that little bit of self-belief, trust me, you can achieve practically anything. And I think that's a great place to leave the podcast. Rob Talks Podcast, episode 6. It's been an emotional one of sorts, and I hope that in my vulnerability and in the lessons that I've had and thought about this week that I've given you some value. But if you would like to discuss them further, then please send me a message. But I hope all of you have an amazing week, have an amazing weekend, and I will see you for episode 7 next Monday. You have just been listening to the Rob Talks podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and please make sure to subscribe and give me a follow on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, Facebook, or even LinkedIn. And I will speak with you soon. Stay safe and have a great week.